If it's nerdy, we're into it.
Gaming, movies, television, wrestling, comics, whatever. We are Kyle Eckert and Chris Heck, two lifelong friends with a passion for the world of geekery.
And this is the GeeK KetchUP podcast.
What's good, GeeK KetchUP listeners? I'm Kyle Eckert.
And I'm Chris Heck.
And you are listening to Season 2, Chapter 37. Today, we're headed back to the world of 8-bit to do our Retro Sports League Challenge wrap-up. Before we get started, though, we wanted to take a moment, as always, to say thank you for listening, and if you haven't already, check us out on social media, GeeK KetchUP Podcast on Facebook and YouTube, at GeeK KetchUP Pod on Instagram and Twitter. Links to all of these accounts are available on our website, geekketchuppodcast.com. There's even a link to our Patreon and PayPal pages if you'd like to support the show. Of course, if you already follow us and would like to help us spread the love of geekery, we ask that you leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform and share us with your friends and family. The GeeK KetchUP Retro Sports League Challenge is something that Chris and I dreamed up as a fun and competitive way to showcase our favorite old-school sports video games. Both of us grew up playing sports and video games, so naturally there are a lot of sports video games in our collections. In the Season 1 challenge, we played Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball on the Super Nintendo, and for Season 2, we went a little farther back, but also took a jump forward, as we set out to play the NES cult classic Tecmo Super Bowl. However, we're playing a modded version on our emulators, so it's the 2014-15 NFL rosters. Chris took his hometown Carolina Panthers, while I rolled with my childhood team, the Indianapolis Colts. For our breakdown on the game itself, including the history of Tecmo Super Bowl and our history with our chosen teams, definitely go check out Chapter 32. This will also get you caught up to speed on the first 8 games of our given seasons. Today, we'll be discussing games 9 through 16, playoff runs, and our final statistics. However, all of that is to come. For now, as we head into our final stretch of chapters for our second season of GeeK KetchUP, we wanted to catch up a bit. So Chris, what have you been up to lately?
I think I can sum up what I've been up to lately in 3 words. Comics and Peloton.
Nice. Comics and Peloton. Which, maybe comics while on the Peloton?
Well, I haven't, leveled up to that point yet where I might need a little stand or something to be able to grab a comic while I'm on the Peloton. I'm also getting mental images right now of like sweating all over the comics, which is just terrifying me. So we're probably going to throw that out the window already.
Okay.
But yeah, in May, I did get a Peloton and just spent the last few weeks, really trying to get back into that habit, really loving it. I'm terrible about going to a gym, so having the on-demand gym classes right here in my office, just pull up the touch screen, throw on a stretch, throw on a cycle, get it done, has been good. Trying to wake up early, like this morning, 6:30, biked 5.5 miles, trying to change some habits, get a little healthier, those kinds of things. But really, that just kind of corresponded because it happened in the month of May. And the main thing that I have been up to lately, geeking out on, if you will, has just been comics. And, with kind of the lull in gaming that's been happening with not a whole lot of new titles, like obviously, we've been playing a lot of Tecmo Bowl lately, and I did put a good bit of time into Returnal. The main thing that I have been doing is just using that free time to catch up on the backlog that I've built of trades. And, you sent me a huge stack of comics, so I had some of my current titles.
Yeah.
And, I just started tearing through them. So, like, Batman Who Laughs, Batman Court of Owls, City of Owls, Night of Owls, Death of the Family, the entire Umbrella Academy first collection, Volume 1 and 2 of Critical Role Vox Machina, Silver Surfer stuff in there, and then, of course, like I said, what you sent me with X-Men, Excalibur, Bounty Hunters, and then even some new ones like Berserker and Bequest.
Yeah.
So, I've been all over the place, but I've just been trying to read as many of those stories that either I'd missed and heard about forever, or, every time you send me a stack, I try to tear through it. So that has really been a lot of fun, lots of different stories. And outside of just a couple, 2 or 3,
Yeah.
they've all been pretty good. Like, I was really impressed with the old stuff I read, and even this new round of current titles, man. I told you, I think via text, like, they were all really hitting on all cylinders. I was very entertained.
Nice. Yeah, that's exciting. Is there one that stands out, whether the old set or the new set that I've been sending you, that, if they've all been good, yes, but is there one that just is a total wow factor?
I mean, the Batman Who Laughs was pretty over the top and intense,
Yeah.
and being one of like the first Batman comics I had read in years and years, like just picked up and sat down and read myself. Like that was the first one I picked up, since it was in my bookshelf over here, the back catalog just sitting there collecting dust. That one really kind of blew my mind, but I was also really interested to see the Silver Surfer trade that I read, because it was Silver Surfer Rebirth of Thanos. And I did not know this, but literally that whole trade pretty much is the plot of how they brought Thanos into the MCU, as far as his main motivations of cutting the population in half and all of that because of what was going on. And so that was kind of cool because I did not know that.
Yeah.
I always thought maybe that was some of Marvel just putting a modern kind of relevant twist on the story that they were building with, Avengers and Endgame and everything. But nope, going back, I think 20 or 30 years, here's this trade that's explicitly got all of those facets of the story in there. There was more involvement of death and whatnot, which,
Sure.
is typical.
Sure.
They kind of cut a lot of that out of the movies. But other than that, it was just really cool tearing through some old, some new, some in between, some indies. I've really kind of just been bouncing all over the place here.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. I remember you texted me, I think you shared a few panels of that Silver Surfer trade, and I didn't realize that it was a Silver Surfer trade. I thought when you sent it to me, it was a Thanos-centric story, like it was an actual Thanos book, but I didn't realize it was a Silver Surfer main,
Yeah.
like as a protagonist.
Yeah, for whatever reason, and this also kind of bummed me out because, of course, Silver Surfer got cut out of the entire, MCU Thanos storyline.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, pretty much in this adventure, it's the Silver Surfer, he kind of comes across Thanos and death and all this happening while he's out kind of doing his own thing in the universe, trying to, I guess, kind of find himself. He seems like he's a little bit separated from Galactus at this point.
Right.
And so he pretty much is the hero. Like, he is the one that is setting out to stop Thanos from, reclaiming all the stones and then, essentially doing the snap that would then take half the population of the universe out.
Right.
And so it was really cool and it was good to see. And, it worked really well. Like, there was a part of me that was like, man, I wish we would have gotten this story on the big screen in some way, but taking it bigger and adding in all the Avengers and stuff, it also kind of blew it up a little bit, I thought, with what they did in the MCU. So it was just cool, stuff I had picked up here and there and just kind of sat on the shelf and hadn't gotten to. There were some others that I bought new, like the Court of Owls series and stuff to pick up on after hearing so much about it over the years. But I'm just knee deep in comics right now,
Yeah, that's a good place to be, man. Like, just knee deep in good comics, like, right? Because there's nothing beats a really good comic story that just sucks you in, and whether you've got it in trade or individual issues, like, you just want to keep burning through it. Like, when you get a good comic story, it's very easy to lose an afternoon or
Right.
2 hours, whatever, depending on what you're reading. Thinking of with Batman Court of Owls, that's, between Batman Court of Owls, City of Owls, Night of Owls, and then into Death of the Family. That's 4 trade paperback volumes. So it'd be very easy to lose an afternoon to that. And that's exciting to hear.
Yeah, and in most cases, that's what I did. Like, for especially the normal size trades, like, I was pretty much just sitting down and then finishing them all inside one day. Some of the others were a little bit bigger, like the Critical Role Vox Machina collection was a bigger hardbound collection. That took me a couple of days, but
Sure.
But yeah, no, to your point, some of these were that good that it's like binging a season of TV.
Oh, yeah. probably a welcomed break from the mutant verse that we have totally gotten ourselves into. And there's no shade towards the various X-Men books that we had been reading, but for a period there, it felt like all we were reading were X-Men books. And
Right.
sometimes you just need a break from your hobbies.
Right. Yeah.
And in that case, like, we needed a break from the X-Men just to read something different. Because I've been experiencing the same thing, like reading a lot of different comics that are not X-Men related and find myself enjoying them.
Yeah, that is totally true. So what have you been up to lately then?
Well, keeping it on a similar path of kind of trying to find ways to make healthy living and then also having some fun. We've been grilling a lot lately.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm not saying
It's that
all
season.
all grilling is healthy, but for a number of years we had a grill, but in the previous house we didn't have like a proper layout to use the grill effectively.
Right.
Like getting from the kitchen to our back deck or our back area because it wasn't a deck of the old house. And then there was a lot of plants and it was just kind of muggy.
Yeah.
And you remember my old house, like it was in the middle of a city. And while there were plants and things around, like it was just a lot of bugs. It didn't make for a fun, like outside grilling experience.
Yeah. You lived in like the secret garden.
Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of like, yeah, imagine
Backyard.
throwing a grill in the middle of a garden. The garden looked nice, I suppose, but it wasn't conducive to grilling, so we very rarely used it. But now with the new house and the new layout and the deck being right outside the back door of the kitchen, I mean, we find ourselves grilling 2-3 times a week now, and it's been really fun because I've worked in and out of kitchens. We've talked about that in the past, but like I've never been an expert griller. So I'm finding myself kind of learning the ways of how to grill properly with
Yeah.
between chicken and burgers. We did steak kebabs earlier this week,
Awesome.
asparagus, Brussels sprouts, corn, kind of across the board. And it's been fun to like learn, make mistakes,
Yep.
eat something. You're like, this is okay. I charred it a little too far. This is terrible. But then also working in like marinades and things like that. And it's just kind of expanding the repertoire that is my cooking knowledge.
It's a skill set, man. I mean, most of cooking takes a little practice, but grilling and, every grill is different. If you're doing charcoal versus gas versus smoking, it's all different, so there's definitely a learning curve there.
Yeah. And to double down on it, we posted about it, when this episode came back, it was last week, but the RAR brews. So we're having a couple of those sour beers, and there's nothing quite like grilling up a piece of chicken or a burger, and you got a nice beer in your hand, the sun in your face, and
Yep.
that's exactly what the experience has been. Just, 1 or 2 beers while I'm grilling, and the sun sets right in our backyard. So it's been nice, been pretty cool as far as just utilizing a kitchen in our home.
Just in time for Memorial Day. I mean, it's grilling season, so it sounds like you've been ramping up and now you're ready to go as we get back outside and get those summer months coming. You'll be able to entertain.
Oh yeah, and honestly, that's part of why I wanted to learn a little more about it because I've been to plenty of barbecues in my life, but very rarely am I running the kitchen or running the grill. I was
Sure.
like, man, if we're gonna host and throw some parties and be grilling, I should be on the grill in my own home.
Right.
So I want to make sure that I'm delivering quality food to my guests.
Well, I'll give you a tip. So when it gets to be corn season here, we can get fresh corn, like corn on the cob.
Mm-hmm.
Grab a bunch of ears of corn, shuck them. A lot of people don't do this, and I get it. You want to do a longer grill time, you can leave the husks on and do some stuff, but shuck them, toss them into a Ziploc bag with a little bit of olive oil, like just enough to help coat it, and whatever seasoning of your choice. You can do it a couple hours ahead, man, and then you pull them out and you throw them on and just kind of give them that turn as you're cooking everything else, 10, 15 minutes, whatever they char up. It's incredible. It's the easiest thing to do, and it's just, boom, amazing side dish.
I love hearing that because that is exactly how we've been doing
Oh,
corn
there
on the
you go.
cob. Yeah, like to the T, man. Like maybe not the Ziploc bag. We've been using we have like Tupperware containers that are a little larger.
Yeah.
So, throw some olive oil in, and I started that practice when I started to do Brussels sprouts. And then I went from grilling I went from doing oven roasted Brussels sprouts. Then we have the air fryer, so I started throwing them in the air fryer, and that was really good. And then once we got into grill season, just starting to learn to grill Brussels sprouts, it's been a little different, but we took the same practice that we were doing with the Brussels sprouts as far as putting them in the Tupperware, throwing some olive oil, salt, pepper, a little bit of Italian seasoning, and maybe a couple other things, like if we want to spice it up that night. So taking that same practice and applying it to corn on the cob, like you said, completely shucked. And then we throw it on the grill, we turn it over, get a nice char. And then when I go to pull it off, just taking like a little slice of butter and just letting it melt over top. And
perfect.
It's been really, really good. So like I've had the biggest smile on my face because you said like it always makes me feel better when I am doing something in the kitchen that Chris approves because you have that culinary background. So I'm like, man, if I'm doing something that Chris tells me that I should be doing, then I know I'm doing it right.
You're on
like,
the right track. Yeah.
On the right track. Because I think I texted you a while back about trying to make a balsamic dressing.
Yep. Yeah. We were talking about that.
We were a little delayed in the response, but I had already done it right. Like when you finally answered me, I was like, I did it right. Yay. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I use a lot of those like different pre-done seasonings, like McCormick, and a lot of those different seasonings you can get that are different, like Chipotle and roasted garlic on the corn, or like the brown sugar bourbon. I mean, like those things go perfectly with seasoning corn and doing it that style. So, but yeah, you were already on it, so don't worry about it. Keep doing what you're doing.
The brown sugar. Well, you just said brown sugar. I'm like, oh yeah, that's about to take it up a notch when I go get that brown sugar.
Yeah, dude.
And start doing that on the various meats and stuff, because we have been using the packets and the McCormicks and things like that. But I felt like making my own seasonings and my own kind of blends is next level.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you can definitely get into all of that, either way. But yeah, man, I'm so hungry right now. I didn't eat any breakfast this morning, and now I didn't expect our discussion here to get into food like this. And I'm like, I need grilled corn in my life.
Yeah, and it is Memorial Day weekend. Like I've set Chris on a path.
I know. We are right here on the edge.
Right. It's gonna happen. Well, as always, we hope that you enjoyed our catch-up session. Certainly hit us up on social media if you've got any new ideas for things I should try grilling, or if you've got any new comics Chris should check out, or new Peloton routines that he should check out.
GeeK KetchUp's top 5 most absurd sports games. Number 5.
NFL Blitz, MLB Slugfest, NHL Hits. They had to make the list. The set of midway games that took known North American sports and franchises to the extreme. Of the set, Blitz, of course, is by far the most popular and longest running. But don't sleep on Slugfest or Hits.
Number 4.
Looney Tunes B-Ball. Exclusive to the Super Nintendo, this 1995 release by Sculptured Software could have been the true inspiration for the original Space Jam. Combining NBA Jam-style mechanics with the wacky world of Looney Tunes, this game was a ton of fun, and we hope to see a comeback of this franchise after Space Jam 2 releases.
Number 3.
Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. Typically known as a fighting game series, Dead or Alive broke away from the combat for a bit of beach fun in this 2003 Xbox release. Team Ninja went above and beyond too, because while the gameplay is centered around 2v2 beach volleyball, there's a full story that incorporates NPC relationships that directly impacts on-court performance. Also, Dennis Rodman voices the lone male character in this game, which seems oddly fitting.
Number 2.
Bill Laimbeer's Combat Basketball. Endorsed by real-life Detroit Piston from the Bad Boy era, this was actually the first basketball game to be released on the Super Nintendo. Developed by Hudson Soft, Future Basketball, as it was named in the European release, is straight up ridiculous. It's basketball with no refs, no rules, randomly placed bombs on the court, and allows players to use weapons on each other mid-game.
Number 1.
Aqua Teen Hunger Force Zombie Ninja Pro-Am. Yes, this is a real game. Released in 2007 on the PS2, this game got absolutely horrible reviews, but for purposes of this list, it's a masterclass. First and foremost, it is the characters from Aqua Teen Hunger Force playing golf, but in between holes, it's anything but golf. With fighting game and kart racing elements mixed into the fold, Googling this game is well worth your time. Oh, and commentary is provided by none other than former ESPN anchor and fellow Marylander, Scott Van Pelt.
Aqua Teen Hunger Force Zombie Ninja Pro-Am might have to be the game we highlight in next season's Retro Sports Challenge.
Let's make it happen. It's all encompassing. We're always talking about, what sport should we highlight? And this is kind of all sports. It's golf, boxing, NASCAR. Let's make it happen.
Food. It is
Food.
like super on brand for us.
Yeah. We'll get, we'll get Scott Van Pelt to come commentate for us.
There it is.
There's a guest appearance.
Next season's Retro Sports League Challenge is going next level. Anyways, we are here to talk about one of the greatest sports games of all time. And as Kyle mentioned at the beginning of the chapter, you can catch all the details about our first 8 games in Chapter 32, or you can hit up the GeeK KetchUP YouTube channel to watch all the gameplay videos for our regular season and playoff games that we're going to get into today. And bringing us to today, we are going to be breaking down everything that happened to us during games 9 through 16, as well as those playoffs, talking our team and player stats. And of course, it means we will find out who is taking home the title of GK Retro Sports League Challenge Season 2 champion. Was I able to recover from the abysmal 3-5 start to defend my RSLC title from last season? Or did Kyle maintain his momentum and claim the glory? We're about to find out here, folks. So diving right into it here, I'm going to throw it over to you, Kyle, to start us off. How did your second half of your season go, and were you able to maintain that momentum after going 7-1 during the first half?
I'll say that I dropped off a little bit. I still had a over 500 record all in all, but I had more losses in the second half than I did in the first half. I think I went 5-3 in the second half of the season, so a couple losses mixed in with there. Obviously, I ended up with as a 12-4 record, third best for my NFL in my playthrough. So not as strong. I wasn't blowing teams out the way I was in the first half. And I don't know if that was the CPU kind of bouncing back a little bit, or maybe I got a little nervous as we approached what was potentially playoff time.
The pressure came on.
Yeah, the pressure came on, but I feel like I had a solid second half. Obviously, I was picking up wins, and I won all the key games that I needed to win. But as far as like just dominating the field, it wasn't quite the way it was on the first half. How about you?
Well, it sounds like it was a little bit of the opposite, right? So you didn't have quite as bad of a back half of the season as I did the first half of my season. Thinking back, we were sitting here recording that chapter. I'm talking about eating humble pies. I was 3-5 through those first 8 games, and I was kind of distraught. Like, it took me a little while to even get up the excitement to keep going here. We've both had some interesting roller coasters of emotions as we've gone through these sports league challenges, and obviously for some different reasons between last season and this season. But being 3-5 in a football season, man, that is dire straits.
Oh yeah.
You usually can't lose many more than 5 games and have a guaranteed shot at playoffs when there's only 16 games in a season. But after we talked, I was picking up on some of those little tips you were laying down to the listeners when we were talking, and I was like, I'm going to go implore some of these. So when I went into the second half of the season, I adjusted the playbook. I started using some of your little defensive tips about picking, pass plays most of the time and then trying to cover the run and things like that. And so it made a world of difference because I went through the second half of the season with a 7-1 record to come out at 10-6.
Okay.
So I was riding high going through the back half of the season after I got through those initial couple of games. And of course, I couldn't finish it off 8-0. That's what I was really hoping for. But it really turned things around for me.
That's good. Yeah, I know you kind of mentioned that in one of your playthrough videos as I was watching and editing those together, that you had changed defensive tactics. And I think that is a key to this game, is you got to go full Ray Lewis on defense.
Right? Yeah.
You have to say, I'm going to pick a pass play and then cover the defense.
Yep.
Like, I'm going to be Ray Lewis. I'm going to be that middle linebacker. Nobody's going to run on me. And I think in the end, the game does burn you a little bit sometimes for that. I know that you had a similar experience as I did, where some running backs in some games you come up against them, and for no reason, they're just like basically Bo Jackson.
I know, right? It's like every Tecmo Bowl year still has to have somebody who's basically Bo Jackson.
Yeah. And so you run into that from time to time, but I think overall it's still a preferred way to play defense, a more consistent way to play defense.
Right.
So I'm glad to see that my tips and tricks kind of helped you a little bit. I didn't realize that you changed your playbook. Which plays did you get rid of and which did you bring in? Or like in general?
Yeah, it was more about just the diversity. So like the basic playbook that I just went into with had, I think, in the run game, like 2 up the middle runs that just never could do anything, like straight up the middle, like A-gap runs that just never were really working for me. In Tecmo Bowl, going up the middle usually just turns into a big clump of pixelated people.
You're running into your linemen.
Yeah, you're running into your linemen. So I adjusted those to give me, 2 to the right, 2 to the left type deals going to the outside, as they seem to work a little bit better in the game. And then the passing plays I had were just a lot of streaks. Like I remember it was like everything was a streak. And so even though I ended up mostly throwing those longer passes when I would pass in this game, since I am much more of a run first guy, I did mix those up a little bit so that way I would have the occasional over the middle and just a little bit more options there instead of like, hey, did my wide receivers on the outside get open? And if not, having no options. So,
oh yeah,
but really for me, the bigger difference was changing up the run plays and then how I played defense. Because beforehand, like I would always go back and forth, pick a run, pick a pass. I would try to think about it more real world situational, and like having played a lot more Madden over the years than Tecmo Bowl, at least in recent times, right?
Yeah.
You can do that a little bit more because most modern Madden players will actually follow kind of the norms that you see in a lot of football, like on TV, retro and whatnot. In Tecmo Bowl, I didn't feel like I was getting that same level of results that I would like from trying to guess a pass play on a 3rd and long versus a run play on a 2nd and short.
Yeah.
Because the computer seems to just do whatever the computer wants to do. Like,
oh yeah,
3rd and 21 and Nick Foles will still try to like a QB sneak for no reason,
Yeah. And pick up 15.
Right, exactly.
Like very much. Well, and thinking about the run plays that you're selecting, getting away from running up the middle, I had a very similar experience. I did not change my playbook, and it may have burned me in the end, but I had like a delayed up the middle run.
Oh, like
it
a
was
draw?
almost like a draw. Yeah, and that one just never worked. If you watch my various playthroughs on YouTube, you'll see that it just never worked.
Yeah.
All until kind of we get to playoff time, where there was one particular game where it started to work a little bit, but for the majority of the season, that play just was useless. But yet, I'd always go back to it. I'd always try and see what happened. But I would agree with you. The outside runs always work better. And then they also allow you, if it looks like the outside is not there, you can actually stop and run up the middle.
Right, yeah. You can kind of come back.
Yeah, that's a lot easier to do, having the play naturally go outside, but you breaking up the middle versus the play going naturally in the middle and you going to the outside.
Yeah, it's definitely much easier in this game. And you get a little more freedom with the old school arcadey kind of physics, because once you get going, your character kind of stays at one rate of speed unless you hit something or have to break a tackle. Whereas modern Madden now, especially over the last, 5 to 10 years, I'd say, with the increased graphics engines and physics, like now, your running back, you have to get momentum going before he gets up to full speed, even with that turbo button. And if you go to do a full cut from left to right, you pretty much have to like regain that momentum, like just like you would in a real world situation as a human, right? So yeah, you do get a little bit more flexibility with that in Tecmo.
Yeah, and that's exactly point I was going to make, in that it's the old engine, the old school game where it does allow you to do that. Like anybody can cut back and just keep rolling
Right.
because
Yeah.
it's 1993. It is what it is, or 91, I guess, when the game originally came out.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you have a stud in the second half, like just an absolute standout for your team?
The way I play football games, I tend to be real balanced, and I like to hand it off to multiple different people and get a lot of touches to a lot of different folks to keep them fresh. Injuries can be devastating in football games, so it's some of that, keeping that in mind, so that way you don't lose somebody for 6 games.
Right.
So I didn't have anybody that was like, oh my god, crazy standout, but D'Angelo Williams in the second half definitely got the bulk of his yards. I think he ended up with over 1,100 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns. So, he definitely had a good season on the back half, because I was struggling to produce offense in the first 8 games,
Yeah.
between the issues I was having on defense and what I was trying to do on offense. I was just struggling. So, picked that up a lot. But if there was any one person that was kind of beastie in a given category, it was actually Cam Newton from a rushing touchdown perspective, because anytime I would get down in that red zone, inside 10 yards especially, I was just running with him to the left and pretty much would be able to just power in.
Yeah, sure.
So while I didn't pass very much, right, like Cam ended up, I think, 56 of 119 for 1,288 total passing yards, 9 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. He did have 560 rushing yards, but the key here that I'm getting to was that he had 20 rushing touchdowns.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So he really took off. But what's crazy, and we talk about Bo Jackson type players, right? Like both of our games we've mentioned where LaShawn McCoy was just insane.
Oh yeah.
Even though Cam Newton had 20 touchdowns, Shady McCoy, he was second to, because Shady finished with 28. Wow. And just, I couldn't catch up to him. No matter what I was trying to do to take over that number 1 spot, man, he just kept on going. So, a lot of distribution, but D'Angelo and Cam, definitely my 2 MVPs for this season.
Nice, yeah. Well, I'm looking at we talked about it. My run game was abysmal. Like it was just absolutely horrendous. And similar experience, Andrew Luck led my team in rushing touchdowns. So
yeah,
really talking about how I bailed on Trent Richardson about halfway through the season and started using Ahmad Bradshaw. Like Ahmad Bradshaw was better, but not a lot better. Like the passing was definitely the key to my success. But looking at my overall NFL leading rushers, you would have been number 2.
Wow.
In my league, because in my league, the top rusher with 26 touchdowns was Andre Ellington from the Cardinals.
Wow.
And McCoy was the most dominant rusher from a yardage standpoint. But in a touchdown perspective, he only had 23.
I mean, that's still pretty similar. And it's funny to see that shake out on both sides, because he was the top yardage producer on the ground as well in my game. He had 23.98 as far as yards go.
Yeah.
So he had almost the same, he had a little bit better, it seems like, in mine, but he had almost the same performance in both games.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I was going to say, in my game, he came out, with 23.50.
So 48-yard difference.
48-yard difference, yeah. And his average was 12.3.
Wow. Yeah, he was a monster.
Yeah, and I'm actually really looking at this lead here. It's very interesting that Ellington had 23 touchdowns, but only had 1666 yards. So LaShawn McCoy had almost 800 more yards than Ellington did. It's kind of wild to see.
Yeah, that is pretty nuts. I mean, he had more yards than my whole team rushing. Like, let's put it that way, right? So, like, I had a lot of distribution, but just to, like, kind of put a bow on the context of how good he was, I as a team here, let me see, 2,168 total yards as a team that is a rush-first mentality.
Yeah.
And LaShawn McCoy had 23.98. The Eagles in total were number one in rushing in my game at 2,835 yards on the ground.
Wow. I
Yeah.
do have you beat with my game because the Eagles they were the number one rushing team in my game as well, but with 3,052 yards.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And I mean, they had Darren Sproles on that team too. Like they had a little backfield stable going, but LaShawn McCoy, man, just doing shady things and making it work.
Oh yeah.
I do not remember them being quite that good back then. I mean, he was definitely solid in his prime, but it seems like he got that Tecmo Bowl boost.
A little bit. And by comparison, for my team, everybody blows me out of the water. I ended the season after 16 games with 619 yards rushing. As a team.
Wow. Yeah. Even Cam almost had you beat there alone. I would have gotten a little bit more. I mean, if you add up everything, like I said, I was up over 2,000, but I had distributed between Cam Newton, D'Angelo Williams, Mike Tolbert, and Jonathan Stewart all on that team. So, and I was putting them in, using them in different situations. So everybody had a couple of 100 yards minimum.
Okay. Yeah, and my offense just relied on one person and one person only, and that was Andrew Luck. Like I was pass first all the time, and the receiving core of Reggie Wayne, T.Y. Hilton, Hakeem Nicks, and it was just unstoppable. Dwayne Allen thrown in there as the tight end, who in the layout of my playbook actually took the second receiver spot, which was kind of strange. Like on certain pass plays, it wasn't Hakeem Nicks on the outside because that was the typical layout was Reggie Wayne obviously on the number one on the high side and T.Y. Hilton in the slot and with Hakeem Nicks in the number two wide receiver spot. But with the playbook shakeout, a lot of times it was Hakeem Nicks on the inside and Dwayne Allen on the outside. I couldn't tell you why it worked that way, but the plays that I had running, that's how it was shaping up. But it ended up working out because I had a ton of passing yards. And Andrew Luck was just dominant, like by far the best passer in my league.
You were built to the total opposite of what I was with Cam Newton, Greg Olsen, Jericho Cotchery. Greg Olsen's definitely probably a Hall of Famer. He's easily the best tight end that the Panthers have ever had. But, with Kelvin Benjamin being young and didn't really pan out, Jericho Cotchery was a fairly mediocre receiver. I definitely struggled at times with the pass game. I realized as I got through the season, since I didn't pass very much, it took me a while to even realize this. But when I made my play changes in my playbook, I had the same thing happen where like Kelvin Benjamin, like I don't think I threw a pass to Kelvin Benjamin in the entire second half of the season because whatever pass plays I picked, it was always Greg Olsen on one side and Jericho Cotchery on the other. And so I don't know if it really was a negative per se, because I run the ball. I mean, I had multiple games in the back half of the season where I didn't pass the ball more than like one time. Oh. I mean, I've got some serious goose eggs on some of those stats where I was 200-300 yards on the ground and zero passing, but I just didn't have a whole lot of trust in my passing game from the experience early on. So you were really built with a top tier core, and thinking back to that team in real life, Andrew was throwing up between 4,000 and 5,000 yards, tons of touchdowns. Like those years, that team was stout from that passing game.
It was a bit of a carryover from the Peyton Manning era.
True.
Where like for a really long time, the Colts offense was pass focused.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good running backs came through, dating back to Marshall Faulk and Edgerrin James and all of that. Like it's not like there weren't good running backs in Indianapolis. It just the star of the show was always the QB.
Right.
So, and I ended up ending the year, like I said, by far the best passer in my league with almost a 73% completion percentage.
Wow.
And an average of 19 yards per pass.
Solid.
Second best was Aaron Rodgers, and he was at 15 yards per pass with a 66 completion rate. So I was just dominating the field, but I was also low on the attempts. I only had 176 attempts on the whole year, which kind of shapes up. So this is like the bizarre thing that happened in my league with my team. I clearly had a very proficient offense. and to the sense where I was number 3 in total points scored. However, I statistically had the worst offense in the league. And I honestly, I was like, how did this happen? Like, because you look, and I'm literally on the total rankings of all offense, I'm number 32. I have the least amount of yards, awful, but I score all these points. And I'm like, the only thing that I can think of is when I get in the red zone, I score.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I'm just, every drive is, I'm scoring, and there are no, like, oh, punt, come back down the field, get more yardage, get more, more statistics.
Right.
And it's just, there weren't very many missed opportunities, which is a weird thing to complain about, but it made for a very strange statistical year.
That always happens in football games. I see that a lot when I play Madden in my seasons, because between the efficiency that you usually can gain as a user, getting good at the game, of getting in the end zone, and then playing good defense. So you're usually getting a lot of stops, a lot of takeaways. You're getting shorter fields than the average team does, in real life in football, or even when the computer is simulating against other computer teams. So I find that same situation happens even in the modern games. And I was in a similar boat on my side, where even though I started putting up more points and things like that, my yards were really low. Even with rushing, like I wasn't number 1, even, feeding it 98% of the time or whatever it ended up being to my running backs. But it's kind of interesting to hear how different you had with some of your passers, because in my game, Peyton Manning was the top passer, and I only grabbed his yards. I didn't get the full breakdown, but he was the number 1 passer in the NFL with only 3,608 yards. So a lot of the teams, I felt like in my game, in my season, were very run heavy, because 3,600 yards is like the top QB in a football season is really, really low.
Yeah. And I wonder if, like, I know personally the accelerated clock gets me.
Yeah.
Like, it ticks away faster than I want it to tick away, so it keeps you from having a lot of offensive possessions. But yet, I wonder if it impacts the CPU and their stats, because in some cases I feel like it doesn't, but then now hearing that, maybe it did.
It could. I mean, it's possible. Like, I did catch, Andrew Luck where he was in my game, just for comparisons, and he was the number 10 quarterback by yards with 3,378. So he wasn't even that far off of what Manning had, but like the whole top 10 of passers in my league were all within 230 yards of each other.
Yeah, that's really very interesting. Yeah, mine actually matches up about the same, like as far as overall yards, and all those names are there. I think my top passer, the only difference was Matt Ryan.
Oh, okay, yeah,
but Manning was in there at 6th. Luck was I was 5th, and Romo, Flacco, Brady, Rodgers, and then the big surprise would be that Ryan Tannehill, who was number 3 in yardage. But it was we talked about this in the first half. It was Miami Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah,
it was
right.
before Ryan Tannehill became like
the good
stud.
one. Yeah,
yeah.
Of recent memory. It's true. Yeah, it was. That's kind of cool, because I mean, it shows that there's definitely some consistency there. Obviously some things shook out a little differently, but even though we were going through this game on 2 totally separate consoles, same emulator program in the whole 9 yards, but obviously 500 miles away, 2 totally separate consoles, that we pretty much were up against the same experience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I'd actually thought about this, and I wasn't sure, but now that I'm hearing your statistics, it kind of debunks my theory, where I thought that certain teams, because as I was watching how your playoffs and who made the playoffs on your side and who made the playoffs on my side, if the game was experiencing what I call like the Mario Kart factor, and you remember the original Mario Kart, depending on who you chose, it always impacted who was always in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wonder if like Tecmo Super Bowl has a similar vibe, that like because you took the Panthers and that CPU computer assistant balance, if it makes certain teams better than they actually were. But hearing these stats kind of totally debunks that theory.
Yeah, I mean, the stats were kind of similar, but the teams and where they shook out, was definitely different. And I did notice some of that too, seeing some of the videos for our games as we got closer to the end of the season, because those differences were there. Like, you had a couple of teams that were abysmal that I had as playoff teams,
Yeah.
and I think maybe vice versa. And then we had a little bit of overlap, like the Eagles and the Cardinals, and some of those teams seemed to be pretty decent, across both sides. But what was really crazy in my game was that the Broncos actually went 16-0.
Oh, dang.
Like, they flat out dominated the regular season and went a full 16-0. They were pretty high up there with offense. I think they were second overall, only next to the Browns, which was interesting.
Wow.
Browns had the best offense, but went, I think, 9-7 or 8-8, whereas the Broncos were number 2 and just pulled it out. But the Broncos had that defense. If you remember back, that Von Miller-led defense and some of those other guys they had on that team that year, they led in and they beat the Panthers in the Super Bowl. They were stout. And I think that made a big difference for them as far as their regular season record goes.
No, that makes sense. I actually played the Broncos in my opening game, but once again, computer assistant, I smoked them like 33-0. But that was
week 1.
It was week 1. It was week 1. The game was playing me on easy, which by the end of it all, the game was not playing that way. But ultimately, the Broncos actually didn't make the playoffs on my side.
Right. That's what I thought was real interesting, was that they didn't make the playoffs, even though they were like so amazing on my game. But we had a bunch of good games towards the end of the season here for me. And I think one of the big things that really helped me go from 3-5 to division leader and all of that was the fact that I got almost back-to-back games. I think they were within 4 weeks, but both of my games against the New Orleans Saints, who had been the division leader the entire time, came in the second half of the season. So I was able to get 2 really big wins over them that I needed, that pretty much catapulted me into first place, and kind of, even though I didn't clinch a playoff spot until late in the season because of how all the NFC standings were going and how tight the division still was, I pretty much sealed the deal just by beating them, because Tampa Bay and Atlanta were pretty much out of it. But I was super pumped about that, and then went on and got, big win over the Falcons, a big win over the Vikings, tons and tons of rushing. I think when I beat the Falcons 42-14, I had 316 rush yards in that game and literally 0 passing yards.
Yeah. I remember the screenshot you had sent, and I just started laughing like that's too much, but hey, you got to go with what works.
Exactly. Any other standout games for you as far as the back half of the season went?
The standout, I had standout moments, as I'll call them. One thing I did want to highlight while we're still kind of talking in the realm of statistics, one thing that I think helped my team was my special teams. I talked about in the first half, I was the only person in the entire league to have a returned kickoff for a touchdown, and I had 2. Ultimately ended the season with 3. And there was only 2 players in the entire NFL that had kickoff returns for touchdowns. And one was Dante Moncrief. He had 2 returns. And the other was Andrew Luck. And he had 1. And it was in my game against the Giants. And they went for an onside kick.
Wow.
And kind of the way Tecmo Super Bowl operates under special teams, your entire offense is your special teams.
Right.
So your quarterback always plays that up front role.
Yep.
And they went for an onside kick. Andrew Luck returned it, and I got a touchdown, and I freaked out when I started. I was like, oh my God, Andrew Luck just returned a touchdown. Unfortunately, and I guess it's because it was an onside kick, they didn't give me the credit. Like, it happened. It's on video. But when you go and you look at the statistical page, it's not listed. And I was like, no, you got to give me, I want to see return, kickoff return TD, Andrew Luck 1. Like, it would just make my day.
Yeah, I mean, that's rare. I mean, you definitely don't see no quarterbacks out there returning kicks. Like, could you imagine Tom Brady, like, in a blocking position?
Yeah, right. The only time you see it is 2004 Madden, when you put Michael Vick in every possible position.
Yes. He returns all the kicks in that game because he's just absolutely ridiculous.
But yeah, so with that, I didn't really have any, I guess, standout games. If you wanted to pick one, it could be my game 12 against the Washington football team where I clinched the division. But I kind of saw that going in. I was 9-2 going into that game. My division, the AFC South, was just horrible. Obviously, if I'm clinching in, week 12 of the season.
Right, yeah.
So, and in the end, that game, I won it. It's up on YouTube, so definitely go check it out. Like, I get the W, clinched the division, but everything else was just kind of like ho-hum. We're trucking along, solid games here, solid games there. A couple BS moments against the Cowboys and against the Titans, and then a huge BS moment against the Patriots. I had the Patriots beat. I mean, I had them beat, and all I was doing was running out the clock, and Ahmad Bradshaw just randomly fumbled on like the 10-yard line.
Oh, it's the worst.
And then the very next play, Shane Vereen took it like 80 yards to the house and ended the game.
Man.
And I was just, I was heartbroken. I wrote in like all caps on my notes for that game, like effing BS. like I was so upset. And it's the Patriots. It's the Brady-led Patriots. So that one stung.
Yeah.
But, my second half, like I said, it was just trucking along, trying to get those wins, get that bye. Like, I clinched the playoffs in week 12, and then at that point, it was all about picking up W's and making sure I got that first round bye.
For sure. I had kind of this interesting swell of emotions as I went through the back half because I opened up 3-0 or 4-0 right off the bat after being kind of nervous to get back at it, with how things went.
Sure.
And so I was like riding high. Okay, everything is going my way now. I was competitive for the division. And then I definitely hit a little stretch in the middle where the CPU definitely increased its difficulty. They started blitzing me all out, were playing me way tougher, forced me into passing situations and things that I wasn't liking to do. And I had to kind of adjust again, after that initial little push where it was letting me kind of do whatever I wanted with my new game plan.
Yeah.
And I was able to keep squeaking out wins, though. Like, even though things were tough, like, I was having things go my way, whereas in the first half of the season, I felt like none of the breaks were going my way. And, right there at the end, week 16, I play the Browns, and I'm never going to forget this because I go into that video, and I'm, like, making fun of them and making fun of their jerseys, and I wasn't expecting them to be much of a threat. They weren't good at that time, and they were second or third in their division. So I was like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
I had not realized at that point that they were the top offense in my game.
Don't sleep on Brian Hoyer.
Right. And it was a nail biter that ultimately, was the one loss that I had. So that was a little bit of a reckoning right before going into the playoffs. But all in all, outside of some tough matchups, I thought that the games themselves were a little bit better than what I had early on in the season.
Yeah, certainly more competitive.
Exactly.
As somebody that watched them, I watched most of your games. Like, yeah, they are very back and forth, very competitive, like nail biters. They're fun watches for sure.
Yeah, if you like defensive football, that's how like half of my videos came out. It was just straight up defensive matches, baseball scores.
Yeah, we can balance it out because of some of my recordings. I also recorded my game against the Browns, and what's very interesting, and I kind of talk about it in the video, so definitely check it out. They're playing me tough, but I smoke them. So, we'll strike that balance. If listeners want to go check out our YouTube channel and check out our videos for defensive battles, watch Chris's. If you just want to see just high octane offense, watch mine.
Yeah, and speaking of defense, I think before we jump into what happened with our playoffs and maybe our final standings from each of our games, let's talk a little bit about the defensive stats here. So for me, I definitely had a little bit better rankings in the defensive categories than I did the offensive categories. And so I was the top NFC passing defense, only gave up 1,580 yards. I was actually the last rushing defense, which I thought was interesting. even though I felt like I was doing better for the most part in the second half of the season. Like, I gave up a ton of yards in the first half of the season.
Yeah.
And so all that kind of bit me. So I gave up 2,175 rushing yards. But ultimately, really, the Seahawks were the top defensive team overall in my game, which didn't really translate to them getting wins because they didn't get into the playoffs, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. So once again, we're talking about this, like 2 different playthroughs, 2 different emulators, 500 miles away. The Seahawks were the number 1 defense in my game as well. The difference being it did translate to them playing well. They were the number 2 team in all of the NFL that year, or like in my playthrough. Like they only ended up having 3 losses. They went 13-3. They were only outdone by the Cardinals, who went 14-2.
Yeah, see, that's crazy because on my side, just from that standpoint, real quick, San Francisco won that division at 10-5, and Arizona was a wild card team at 9-7. Or sorry, 10-6 for San Francisco and 9-7 for Arizona.
Okay, yeah. The 49ers went 9-7, but they ended up as the number 3 team in that division. And like I said, Cardinals at 14-2, winning the division, and then Seattle at 13-3, who got that wild card. And then I think and then eventually, and we'll get to it, they played each other in my playoffs.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, you always have the any given Sunday factor in football, whether it's real life, college, Madden, anything. 2K.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that any given Sunday factor that really almost any team can win, and anything can happen once you're actually in game, no matter where you are offensively or defensively.
For sure. But for me personally, I ended up 6th defense overall. My passing yards gave up 1553. Rushing, very similar story to you. I gave up 2439, so I had the worst rush defense in the league, but the best pass defense in the league. And I feel partly responsible hearing that that's how your individual season went, because I gave you those tips, and clearly my tips get W's, but they don't put up pretty stats. And that's kind of the factors that, every now and then people are going to break off big runs and hit you with it. So you're going to give up a lot of rushing yards, but in the end, you will get W's.
Well, and Shady McCoy wasn't the only monster in this game. I mean, we both played Giovanni Bernard and a few other guys that were out there at this time in the league. And there were a few guys. Adrian Peterson is still in this game on the Vikings. And, I mean, there were definitely a few guys that were almost untacklable. And I gave up 200 to 300 yards to multiple people throughout the season. So
did I. Sean, but on my side, it was, like I said, Shane Vereen, Sean Green, like all those guys, like really just dominating the run game.
So did you have any defensive players that stood out, like either in the sack category or the interception category?
Nothing in the interception category, and my second half of the season followed kind of my first half of the season in regards to my defense, because it was like a team defense, like not one individual standout. I was just getting solid stops, and I chose Robert Mathis. Like, I played almost exclusively as Robert Mathis when I was on the defensive side of the ball. So I think if I hadn't done that, he would have stood out a little more. He was limited by me controlling him.
Sure.
Robert Mathis ended up with 14 sacks. Francois ended up with 11 sacks. So, like, I had some standouts as far as, like, sacks. I think I ended up with, like, 40-plus team sacks. But it was all spread out amongst my defense. And then my picks were abysmal because, like, it just ended in a lot of incompletes.
Sure, yeah.
Like, I had those great, yardage stats defensively, but no picks.
Gotcha.
It was just a lot of, broken pass plays.
Yeah, I had one guy, Thomas Deku, who had 5 interceptions on my team, and that was the leader. And that's usually a pretty good season for a D-back. I thought that was solid. Yeah. It wasn't number 1 in the rankings of the NFL. Like, there was a few guys that were, I think, 8, 9, like really good interception numbers. But for me, as I said, even in the first 8 games, my defense was also very much about the sacks.
Yeah.
And so I was playing a lot of the defensive linemen with putting pressure in on the quarterback early on, which was working out with Cole and Hardy and some of those guys all really getting in there a lot. And then when I backed up imploring a little bit more of your techniques where you pull one of the linemen back a little bit, it actually opened up where Luke Kuechly started getting a whole lot more sacks with him just kind of running rampant on his own as the computer. So he actually ended up, Luke Kuechly, as the number 1 sack guy in the NFL with 18.
Oh.
Right there at Michael Strahan's record, getting close.
Yeah.
The number 2 guy on my team ended up 7th overall, but he had 15 sacks. And as a team, I ended up with 57 sacks. So you would almost think, like, on one hand, I should have had even better defensive numbers and maybe less trouble getting 57 sacks in one season. But, the big playability of Tecmo Super Bowl is really where it comes down to. You can be third in the mile and just run the ball, and you'll get wide open. You'll make it down. Shady McCoy will go 172 yards in one play and make a touchdown,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. Yours is LaShawn McCoy. Mine's Giovanni Bernard.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, it burns. It stings.
So we touched on some of the standings, but why don't we run through the final standings as far as who made the playoffs in each of our groups?
Okay.
And then we'll cover what actually happened in the playoffs as we head towards wrapping up here. So where were you at as far as all of your NFC, AFC winners?
So AFC, we'll look at the AFC first. We had the Bills winning their division at 11-5. The Bengals winning their division at 11-5, with the Steelers coming in as a wild card, 10-6. And then I, of course, won the AFC South. And then the AFC West was the Chargers winning the division at 9-7, and the Chiefs getting the second wild card at 8-7. So when you look at it top to bottom, I got a bye, and the Cincinnati Bengals got a bye. The Bills and Steelers played each other, and then the Chiefs-Chargers played each other.
Okay. Yeah, for my AFC, I had Indy won the division at 9-7, so Indy did you proud on both sides. Denver, like we said, 16-0. They were clearly the number 1 seed. The Bengals were also good in my game, winning that division and being the second overall seed at 11-5. The Jets won the AFC East and went 9-7, so no Tom Brady in my playoffs. And then you had the 2 wild cards were the Titans at 9-7, so there was 2 AFC South teams, and the Chiefs at 9-7.
Nice, yeah. I didn't have a Tom Brady in my playoffs either. I was very thankful.
Right? That's exactly what we like to see here on GeeK KetchUp.
Indeed. And so for your NFC side, what did that look like?
So on the NFC side, somehow miraculously, I actually ended up with the number 1 seed and was 10-6.
Yeah.
Which was absolutely mind-blowing to me after the start, right? But if you look at outside of Denver and I guess the Bengals technically being 11 wins, if you look at all of the division winners in my game, it was super tight. It's a whole lot of 10-6s and 9-7s.
Oh, wow.
So I think points 4 became a factor, and maybe a couple of the teams that I may have played at some point and got a win, played a factor. But anyway, so you had me at 10-6. Detroit was the number 2 seed at 10-6. Philadelphia at 9-7 won that division. San Francisco at 10-6 won that division. And then the 2 wild cards were the New York Giants at 9-7 and the Arizona Cardinals at 9-7.
Okay. It's very strange how similar it is, because for me, we had the Cardinals, like I said, having the best record in all of the NFL at 14-2, and then the Eagles also, they won their division and got the bye. They were 12-4.
Wow.
Yeah. Then we saw Dallas and the Seahawks coming in as wild cards, and each kind of doing their own thing. Dallas being 10-6, Seattle obviously having a great year, but can't compare to what the Cardinals did. So they had to be a bye team. And then rounding out the rest of the NFC is the Packers and the Saints.
Okay.
And so the Saints went 10-6. Really close matchup there because your Carolina Panthers went 9-7.
Ooh.
So they were right there. They were right there. And then Green Bay went 11-5.
Okay.
So yeah, and that's kind of how it shaped up, and it was close. What I thought was really interesting on my side is I remember the first half, it was all AFC. The NFC records were awful.
Right.
Kind of across the board. I don't think there's maybe like one or two NFC teams that actually had a winning record at the halfway mark.
Yeah.
And then they just seemed to storm back.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, maybe the back half of the schedule was a little bit easier.
Yeah, it was the Seahawks and the Cardinals with the winning records, but everyone else had a losing record. And then, they just came storming back.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. So that did take us up to the playoffs, and I know that I was just thankful to be there at this point, you know? To me, that was like my main goal after the start was like just save face, make the playoffs, make it competitive, you know, and go from there. But it was definitely a continuation of the roller coaster ride. So you can definitely see a lot of the playoffs and how they shaped up on some of our YouTube videos. We did some intro videos. We take you through some of those results as far as the actual scores go. But leading into my game, I didn't know who I was going to play. So I had to pretty much watch it through and got some interesting results. I was in the bracket where my team was going to be the winner of the Giants and the Eagles. Oof. And so I was like praying and doing anything I could, hoping for the Giants to beat the Eagles, because even though I had actually played the Eagles earlier in the season in the first half and beat them, I got to experience how bad Shady McCoy was firsthand and also saw his stats. So like I knew that was not who I wanted to see. But ultimately, the Eagles did win that game. On the other side of the bracket, we saw Indy win their first game in the playoffs over the Chiefs, and they worked them. I mean, that was beastie. And so I thought that was interesting as I was watching Indy to see what would happen, you know, compared to you. Denver, after being so good throughout the regular season, they squeaked out a win. And they had actually 2 wins, just to jump ahead a little bit. So they won their divisional game. They won their AFC championship game. So they ultimately were the ones that made the Super Bowl, but they won both by 1 point.
Oh, wow.
Both games were 1-point wins. So it was really, really close. And then ultimately, we saw the Arizona Cardinals knock out the 49ers in Wild Card Weekend. And then they also went on to beat the Detroit Lions to make it into the NFC Championship. So the Cardinals came out strong through the first couple of rounds of the playoffs here.
Yeah, and the same thing on my side. Cardinals played strong. In what ended up happening is like they had the bye on my side in the NFC and made it all the way to the AFC Championship, where inevitably they came up against division rivals, the Seahawks.
Oh, wow.
And that's what ended up happening on my NFC side is, you know, and it seemed very fitting, like that the 2 best teams in the NFL record-wise would face off against each other, you know, in the NFC Championship for this particular case. But unfortunately, the key to their success went down in Andre Ellington. He went down in the NFC Championship game.
Wow.
The Seahawks ended up picking up the W and moving on to the Super Bowl on my side.
That's pretty crazy. Yeah, for the AFC side, so I mentioned Denver. They made their way through, but before they were able to get to the Super Bowl, what happened in that bracket with Indy was they were on the side with the Bengals, and in the divisional rounds, the Bengals were able to overcome them and knock Indy out. So that AFC championship matchup in my game ended up being Bengals and Broncos. So it was still the top 2 AFC teams, similar to what you're saying, but just on that side of the bracket. And then, 28-27, Denver squeaked it out against them and went to the Super Bowl.
And it's so interesting that your AFC side, because I took an AFC team, you took an NFC team, so we're playing opposites here, that your AFC side played out very similar to my NFC side.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah. And then we're sitting there like video games, coding.
Right. So what happened with your actual playoff games? This is what we are all here for.
Yeah, so with my actual playoff games, so what ended up happening? The Bills. I'll do the top half of my bracket, and then I'll do my games in particular. So, the Bills ended up beating the Steelers. Went up against the Bengals. The Bengals, got that week bye, got the fresh legs. They ended up winning. So the Bengals are waiting for me in the AFC Championship if I can get there. So then the Chiefs Chargers go head to head. Nice little divisional matchup there. Chiefs they got Jamal Charles back right before that game started and ended up factoring in. They got the win. So in the divisional round of the playoffs, I had to take on the Kansas City Chiefs with a fresh Jamal Charles. And I was nervous.
Yeah.
And I really was. And I kind of talked about it because I recorded that game. We put it up there. It had been a very long time since I had been nervous playing Tecmo Super Bowl. Because,
it was all on the line.
It was all on the line. I was like, oh, man. And it got to me. Like, I felt myself, like, tensing up. And I'm like, this is a video game. This is so silly. But there was a lot on the line here. I wanted to redeem myself for the Retro Sports League Season 1, where I didn't even make the playoffs. I wanted to get these wins. And so I'm going up against the Chiefs in the divisional round, and it was back and forth. It was a very tight game. And ultimately, I did get the W 25-20, but it all came down to a final punt.
Ooh.
Where I was down and I was broken. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, I had this great year. I'm the more experienced Tecmo Super Bowl player of the two of us. And I was like, and here I am losing in my first playoff game. So with a couple minutes left in the fourth, I had to punt, and it was a boomer. And sure enough, they fumbled the ball. They returned it, and during the return, they fumbled, and I picked up the return and housed it.
Oh, went back for the score?
Went back for the score.
Wow.
And it gave me the leg up, which ultimately ended up giving me the W. So I got that divisional round win over the Chiefs and marched on to the AFC Championship against the Bengals.
Had the football gods on your side.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that's exactly what I thought. I was, you know what? The football gods, the video game gods are with me. They want me to get this win. They want me to redeem myself after the disaster that was season 1. So I was feeling pretty good. And I would say, how did your, you went in, like you said, up against the Eagles. You didn't want it to happen.
No.
The Eagles did beat the Giants, and then you had to face them in the divisional round. So what happened on your divisional round side?
Yeah, it was a tough matchup through and through, and it was so funny because thinking back on it, I know even though we had some technical difficulties with the video capturing on that, so I lost like my personal intro of me coming into the game, but I know that as I was booting up that game and getting it ready, I had won the coin toss and kicked off.
Nice.
And I had said to myself, or to the video, the recording, the fans, I had said that it's dangerous giving Shady McCoy the ball to start out, because, you might be playing from behind from the get-go.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened.
Oh.
So, pretty much, I think it was the second play of the game, he went for 70, 80 yards and scored a touchdown. And that was the story of how this went. So pretty much got going, tried to come right back. It was fairly close, and they never blew me out or got too far ahead. But, I was chasing from that. It pretty much put me in a position to chase from behind instead of leading from ahead. And so it was just back and forth, and I was doing everything I could to score points. Graham Gano kicked a 60-plus yard field goal in this game.
Yeah.
Graham Gano also probably kicked a 70-plus yard field goal in this game because I was doing anything I could just to get points on the board because of how things were shaking out. Shady was unstoppable, and their defense was just on it. They were shutting down my runs in a lot of places. I didn't have the flow that I was looking for. Couple big interceptions, couple big tip passes. It was a another one of those defensive battles, even though the points were a little higher in this video versus some of the others. But ultimately, no matter what I could do, I was still playing from behind, got into the fourth quarter. I was down 28-21, made a stop, drove back down the field, and in the red zone, Cam Newton on his first run play in a good bit of time just fumbles. Just fumbles the ball, turns it over. And it pretty much ended up being the end of the game and the end of my season right there. No playoff victories for me, and I lost 28-21.
That's a heartbreaker. You put your faith in your captain, your star of the season.
20 touchdowns, man.
20 touchdowns. Obviously, I've been running all season, and he fumbled. That sucks.
That's that computer, man. Like the playoff time, and we always talk about how you always talk about really about the computer getting more difficult when you do well, and winning all those games going into the playoffs did me no favors.
Yeah,
and ultimately, Shady McCoy was the story of the game. I mean, he had 6 attempts for 269 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Oh my God.
And if you go watch the video on YouTube, you will see that on at least 2 of those breakout runs, I had him with Greg Hardy, a D lineman, saw the play coming, caught him after like a 5-yard gain, and he just throws him off.
Yeah.
Jukes out 2 other guys, and then just is uncatchable the whole way down the field. So, I mean, I got completely wrecked by the rushing leader and was very salty. I was very unhappy. But ultimately, just to wrap up my side, I did get a little bit of redemption or felt a little better, I should say, because when the Eagles went up against the Cardinals in the NFC Championship, the Cardinals waxed them, took them down, got me a little bit of feel-good redemption there. And so the Super Bowl in my game ended up being the Cardinals and the Broncos.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, it was the Cardinals that won it.
Oh, wow.
So the Cardinals went from wild card. They go in like the Giants of, years and years ago up against the 18-0 Patriots. Like essentially the Broncos are 18-0 at this point in my game, and the Cardinals give them that first loss to deny them the Super Bowl.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I think it was 37-14. So, I mean, they pretty much waxed them.
Yeah. Wow, that's kind of wild. But hearing your experience with LaShawn McCoy, it's giving me flashbacks of what went down in my AFC Championship game. Yeah, because as I said, I was up against the Cincinnati Bengals in the AFC Championship, and it is almost the exact same story, but with Giovanni Bernard. Like, it was just the overall team speed of the Bengals could not be matched. Andy Dalton, we talked about Michael Vick in Madden 04.
Right.
You would have thought that Andy Dalton was Michael Vick in Madden 04. His just the quick legs. He was breaking out, doing little QB sneaks. He was throwing dimes to Tyler Eifert. I mean, at one point, Tyler Eifert was triple covered in motion and still was making catches. There just seemed like there was nothing I could do. And then on top of the fact, Giovanni Bernard going for 200-plus yards in the exact same manner that you're talking about. And I was trying, and I was hanging tough. I went back after I recorded because the final score of my game, I'll just go ahead say it up front, I lost. And it sucked. And I was totally demoralized. And I ended up losing. The final score ended up being 31-16.
Ooh.
And it sounds bad, but when I went back and I watched it over, it's actually a very competitive game, and it only got that bad because of some final things that happened right towards the end of the game.
Okay.
And it was where I was just trying to do, like I was just, trying to get the ball in the end zone or down the field any way I could, and they were just, getting turnovers and then quick scores.
Yeah.
And that's just what got me. The game was not doing me any favors as far as pass completions and things like that. I had right before halftime, I was down by a score and the clock was running out and I threw Reggie Wayne on a streak and he was wide open, as wide open could be. And Andrew Luck overthrew him by like 30 yards.
What?
And it made no sense. I wasn't being rushed. I was in the pocket. It was clear as day. I got excited because I was like, oh man, I'm about to tie it up right before halftime,
Right.
get the ball back, and out of nowhere, Andrew Luck just sails one. 30 yards over his head. Big drops all throughout. T.Y. Hilton not playing the way that he normally played on the dump-offs. Reggie Wayne with a couple key drops. And then the big thing that got me is in 16 seasons of the regular season, I threw one interception.
That's amazing.
My interception percentage was insane. I had a 1.7 interception percentage. It's insane.
Yeah.
I threw 2 interceptions in the AFC Championship.
Oof.
And it was just one of those moments where I was, you're fighting, you're grinding, you're trying to keep spirits up.
Yeah.
But the game is just not doing you any favors. And in the game's defense, I guess what I should have done was started to realize that Giovanni Bernard was going to be unstoppable, and just changing my defensive strategy and picking the run plays. Like, clearly my strategy was no longer working because, very similar to you, I was taking Robert Mathis, I was getting to the ball, and I was getting bounced off. And then once you get bounced off, the CPU players aren't going to make that tackle.
Not usually, no.
Not in this game. Not with the old school mechanics and things like that. That's not going to happen. You need to be the one to make the tackle. So, looking back, I should have made that adjustment. I should have changed things up, and I didn't. I just stayed the course and thought that my offense would do it, but my offense just wasn't there either. Like, I couldn't get the pass going. Ahmad Bradshaw had a really good game against the Chiefs. So I started to go back to that, but then he turned back into the same old runner that he was all in the regular season. I just wasn't getting any breaks, so that's kind of how it ended. My season ended in a very similar fashion how yours did, just in the AFC Championship.
Yeah, it definitely felt like the difficulty turned up a little bit, and I guess you should expect that as, you head into a playoffs of any sports game or tournament in real life, right? You get the best of the best. And so I had some similar thoughts in the game, about changing up my approach and going to selecting the run plays and whatnot. But I thought for sure that I could just read them. I started to read the plays, and I knew that they were coming. So I was going right at him with the player that I was controlling, and it just didn't matter.
Yeah.
And I feel like I was in a little bit of denial mid-game because I was like, okay, well, he did it the first time. He's not going to do it every time.
Yeah.
Oh, and then he did it the second time. He's not going to do it the third time. And then he just kept 80-yard running it. I mean, he just kept going all the way downfield no matter where they were and scoring. And so I could just never fully catch back up,
Yep.
And I had a couple turnovers, the blocked kick. I think I had one of my extra points blocked. There was a few other things that added in there, but it definitely buckled down on us and ended the seasons.
Yeah, it was a heartbreaker, man. It really was. Like, there's just this moment in the video where, like, I'm just demoralized and I'm just done. And I'm so bummed out because I was like I said, it was all about redemption for season 1, and it just didn't work out. And then kind of coming to the realization that this is what it is. The game is going to put you through this and hard times, and maybe I'll go back and play an unofficial season and just to feel better about myself. But similar moment, I had the Bengals in their playbook have 2 low side runs, and at one point I picked one of the low side runs, and I didn't pick the play because you can always tell when you pick the play.
Yeah.
It's like an all-out blitz and just ends immediately. So I didn't pick the right low side run, but you would think naturally, okay, the game is going to cover a low side run. Didn't matter. Giovanni Bernard was gone. And it was just brutal all around. The only saving grace, I guess, for me is, yours, you lost, and then the Cardinals turned around and waxed the Eagles, and so you get that, you feel better that they didn't go on. The Bengals actually went on to the AFC Championship, and then went on to the Super Bowl and beat the Seahawks.
Oh, wow.
So the Bengals actually won the Super Bowl in my game, and they give you that end credits, and they show the whole team, and I was sitting there looking at it, and I'm like, they have some standouts. You know, they had AJ Green. Andy Dalton is a okay quarterback.
Right.
I think it'd be hard pressed to say Andy Dalton's going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback.
No, not at all.
But he wasn't bad. A Trent Dilfer. You know.
Well, I mean, on paper, those Bengal teams were some of the best that they've had in decades. Like, they were making the playoffs a little bit. They never got over the hump, but I mean, Vontez Burfict and some of those guys, that defense was kind of stout. Marvin Lewis coach. I mean,
I was going to say, Marvin Lewis coaching. Sure, yeah, they were good, but they were never Super Bowl good.
Right.
And that's what burned me. Was like, man, this is a good team, respect, but like, were they ever Super Bowl good? I don't know.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no, it was tough. And I mean, it all comes back to, as salty as it made me as well, like, we do this more so to highlight the games. And so, like, the silver lining for me was that I hadn't played this game in years and years and years and years. You know, it wasn't like Griffey to me, where I've always kept up with it and continuously played a couple times a year or whatever. And not one game that we usually would throw in for if we were hanging out. We would always go Griffey or Jam or whatever it was. So it definitely taught me a lot more about it. I feel like I am a better Tecmo Bowl player today than I was when we started this.
Sure.
And so, you know, the silver lining, like, I keep going back and forth since it all went down on like I'm still pissed that I didn't go through and make the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. But like, on the flip side, I probably wouldn't have played this game unless we did this. So,
sure.
You know, it kind of evens out a little bit, I guess. But ultimately, you really now have the crown for champion of the GKRSLC because of the fact that you had a better regular season. You went further in the playoffs than I did. Unfortunately, this time around, neither of us actually won the championship, but that's not really what deems necessarily who comes out on top this season. So you still got your redemption. Maybe
still got
not.
That, yeah. It's not the total redemption I wanted, but you know, I guess I can say I have the GeeK KetchUP Retro Sports League Challenge crown.
Yep.
For now, so we're at 1-1, and we'll move on to hopefully bring this back in season 3 and get some fun things. Maybe we'll end up playing Aqua Teen Hunger Force Zombie Ninja Pro-Am.
That'll be the true test of who is the better sports gamer, I think, here is that game in all its glory.
Indeed. Well, that is a wrap on the second Retro Sports League Challenge. Make sure to hit us up on social with your thoughts on Tecmo Super Bowl, and certainly subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our complete games.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this chapter, be sure to hit the subscribe button to get new chapters of GeeK KetchUp every 2 weeks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to follow the show on social media, and you can find us on Facebook and YouTube at GeeK KetchUp Podcast, or on Twitter and Instagram at GeeK KetchUp Pod. Links to all these accounts are in the show notes below and on our website, GeekKetchUpPodcast.com. Stay saucy, you nerds.